Welcome to episode 21 of the Extremely Non-Extreme podcast. I am the host, Quentin Wittrock. Today, we bring you the fifth in a series of podcasts about federal policy issues as we explore the 10 policy statements listed in my Principle-Based Politics blog of November 24th. Having previously covered immigration and deportation policy, along with tax, business regulation, and federal energy policy, I will focus today on the tariff and international trade policies of the United States. My statement is America benefits from fair trade and fair tariffs. Rather than asking a guest to discuss this complex topic, I have studied the issues thoroughly and will handle this one myself. The tariff war is not the main war in the news these days. I understand that. And I have much more to say about Iran, which I will say, but as for now, I'm reserving judgment on that war. The connection, as I see it, is that tariffs, like bombs, are leverage that the president is using to get his way in the world. It's the art of the deal. And I'm waiting to see if this results in a good deal, a fairly obtained deal, and something that benefits the United States and the people of the United States. Let's look a little bit about the history of tariffs. Mr. Trump calls himself Tariff Man, and he likes to use tariffs as a tool to bludgeon nations, industries, and even specific companies to do his wishes. He did this during his first term, and he campaigned in 2024 on promises to do so again. Liberation Day in February of 2025 was his announcement of the new set of tariffs for his second term. That was quickly challenged in court, as I'm sure you have heard. The case found its way to the United States Supreme Court, and the ruling came down on that shortly before the Iran war started. So let's talk about the ruling on the tariff war. President Trump had used the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA or IEEPA. That law is passed by Congress, and it allows the president to do certain things, to have certain powers in this situation. Quote, an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security, foreign policy, or the economy of the United States. President Trump first said that fentanyl trafficking was the emergency, which justified his ability to impose tariffs. Then he said it was the trade deficit, the balance of trade in the world. Case came to the U.S. Supreme Court, and in February, so last month, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Mr. Trump exceeded the president's authority under IEEPA. The power to regulate importation does not mean the power to tax, according to the U.S. Supreme Court. The president also has the power, by the way, to regulate lots of things, from securities to pollutants to pharmaceuticals. But that does not mean that the president has the power to tax them. Article 2, Section 8 of the Constitution provides Congress has the power to impose tariffs, to impose taxes. However, Congress has passed a few statutes giving the president tariff power in certain circumstances. The Supreme Court of the United States thinks that the Liberation Day tariffs are not one of those circumstances and invalidated the baseline tariffs that the president had imposed. The rationale was actually quite simple. Constitution gives the Congress the power to tax. Tariffs are taxes, according to the Supreme Court, and no national trade emergency exists to transfer that power from Congress to the president through IEEPA. The tariff power is expressly given to Congress in Article 1, not to the president in Article 2. The Supreme Court majority says that the executive branch must have specific congressional authorization. This is where the major question doctrine comes in. The imposition of taxes, or in this case, tariffs, is a major question, according to the Supreme Court. And in a major question, the executive branch lacks the power to usurp Congress unless Congress explicitly grants that power to the executive branch. Now, the dissenting opinion in the recent Supreme Court case says that the case involves foreign affairs, such that the major questions doctrine does not apply, according to the dissent. But a dissenting opinion is not law, and 6 justices have ruled otherwise. So let's look at what has been the impact of the tariffs that were imposed, as we know that the president will try to, and has already tried to, reimpose similar tariffs under other acts. The Wall Street Journal called the president's tariffs, quote, the largest economic policy shock in more than 50 years, close quote. So what has been that shock? What actually has been the impact of those tariffs? We now know, after the tariffs being in place in various forms for a year, what the impact was. What was the impact first on trade deficits, which was one of the rationales underlying the tariffs in the first place? The United States is still buying much more from overseas than we are selling overseas. The tariffs did reduce our deficit with China, but because India took away some of the iPhone production, for example, from China. But there remain record high trade deficits now with India and with Vietnam and other countries. So we're still in a trade deficit of approximately $900 billion to $1 trillion, which is unchanged from 2024. So the tariffs so far have not fixed our trade imbalance to the extent it is a problem. What has been the impact on the stock markets? The stock markets went down on the Liberation Day when the tariffs were announced, and then they have gone back up when President Trump has backed down or altered some of those tariffs. This pattern has repeated itself over and over again as the tariffs will be announced, new tariffs will be imposed, markets go down. Then when those tariffs turned out to be leverage in negotiations and they are withdrawn, then the stock markets go back up. The name sarcastically imposed for this is on Wall Street, traders are engaging in the taco trade based on the belief that Trump always chickens out. So they have been selling when the markets were high and then buying them back when they go down after tariffs are announced. There have been, I must say, 52 stock market highs since Trump was elected in 2024. So the stock markets overall have done well during the Trump administration and during the tariff war that has been going on. So what has been the impact on inflation? Economic studies show that 25 to 40% of tariffs are passed on to consumers, with U.S. companies bearing most of the rest of the tariffs that are not passed on to consumers. So has this caused prices to increase? Has this contributed to inflation as the tariff program was expected to and predicted by experts to do? It's not clear that inflation has spiked. In fact, inflation is lower than it was when President Trump took office. So the inflation fears have not been realized. One study found, though, that Americans pay 96% of the tariffs rather than foreign countries paying those. and inflation has continued. And I don't know if that is because of tariffs or not, but tariffs have not had a significant impact on tariffs so far, on inflation so far. Let's look at the impact on jobs. Manufacturing jobs were deemed to be one of the bases for the imposition of these tariffs. The idea was that American manufacturers would benefit by selling more products, and foreign manufacturers would sell fewer products because there would be tariffs imposed on those imported products. So, what has been the impact on manufacturing jobs? Manufacturing jobs in the United States actually declined by 67,000 in 2025. Uh, Again, tariffs are taxes. Taxes restrain growth. And when there is less growth, there is less job production being introduced into the markets. Oil and gas, mining, and wholesaler jobs all have decreased in the last year. So the other justification that we hear from the White House has to do with federal revenues. We'll use all of this tariff money to pay for things that our country needs. The U.S. collected $163 billion in tariffs in 2025. That's 93 billion of that was from these IEEPA duties that were put in on an across the board fashion. And already in 2026, before the Supreme Court ruling, another $40 billion in tariffs were collected. So we have collected in the neighborhood of $200 billion of tariff revenues, which can be used by the Treasury for anything that the government believes is necessary. The president has promised to use these revenues to justify various categories of spending that he has proposed. The spending that he says tariffs will cover, if you add it all up, however, is approximately $6 trillion compared to the $200 billion that have been collected. So in 2024, tariff revenue was $80 billion. Now, if it's over $200 billion, that does give us more money to spend. So we will have to wait and see if that money can be used, but it certainly is not going to be, even if the tariffs are allowed to be kept by the Treasury Department, it's not going to be a cure-all for all of our financial woes. On a country that spends $7 trillion a year, even $200 billion or $300 billion in tariff revenue is not going to fix our budget deficits. So we're not going to be able to cover all the WIC payments or child care, create a sovereign wealth fund, pay off all of the farmers, have a Ukraine victory fund or cash dividends to everybody in the country in large amounts. And we're certainly not going to be able to offset our deficit or any other increases in the defense budget, $1.5 trillion, or pay off our debt overall. Tariffs so far on drugs have been imposed. We have, to some extent, improved the trade imbalance, perhaps with China and perhaps with a few other countries. But as I said, that rationale has also gone by the boards to some extent. So really what tariffs have been used for and have had the greatest impact is in negotiations with non-trade relationships. President Trump has used tariff threats for leverage against foreign nations, industries, and even specific companies. He has gotten companies to agree to investments in the United States, and these may have long-term benefits to the United States. So I think it's too early to know for sure if tariffs will be allowed to continue in a big way, and if those tariffs will help America or hurt America. So far, this war seems to be somewhat of inconsequential, certainly less consequential than the war now going on with Iran. So, what's next for tariffs? Trump responded by immediately announcing a 10% tariff on the day of the Supreme Court ruling under other bases. And then now, including today, he says that the 15% tariffs will actually go into effect at this time. Just as quickly, though, he has exempted agricultural goods, products covered by the Mexico-Canada trade agreement, those covered in a separate deal with Central American nations, steel, aluminum, and automobiles. So what are these other acts that the president will try to use if he cannot use IEEPA? There's something called the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 that allows national security tariffs. There's also the Trade Act of 1974, and that targets unfair foreign practices. And then there's an old act called the Tariff Act of 1930 that allows retaliation against countries that discriminate against American trade. On these, Congress would have to approve some of these tariffs after a certain period of time, or the State Department would need to do certain studies to prove the bases for these acts to kick in and the president to have that tariff power. Another possibility, although I don't think this will happen, is that Congress could pass a new tariff law that expressly grants the executive branch power to levy tariffs for new reasons beyond any of these acts and what they provide right now. Because again, this is a major question, and it's up to Congress to grant the power to the president on major questions like this. The big question left unanswered now, of course, and this has been in the news a lot, is what will happen to the hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs that were collected before the Supreme Court ruled. And again, in arguing against tariff levies, the DOJ in 2025 had defended those levies by saying that there is no irreparable harm from the tariffs because everyone can just get refunds on the tariffs if the tariffs are invalid. So that was the Department of Justice's way of saying that there should be no injunction to block the tariffs. So the tariffs were not blocked, and now people have asked to have their money back now that the tariffs have been invalidated after they were collected. So in the end, the Supreme Court did not lay out any roadmap for how this would work to get these people back the money that they've paid in, or what will happen to all of that money. Tariffs typically are paid by the importer of record, who typically passes the tariff on to the next purchaser. So it wouldn't be the consumer anyway who would get repaid a tariff if a tariff is repaid. It would be the person that actually paid the tariff that would be the payer of record that would get a refund. Much is yet to be determined. I've noticed that now that the Iran war is going on, there hasn't been much discussion at all of anything else in the news, including tariffs. So while it was the topic of the day, it seems to be in the background right now, but it is still out there, and I wanted to cover tariff policy in this podcast. I hope I've helped to clarify things. In summary, if anyone asks you, if you're wondering what you should think about tariffs, President Trump's tariff policy has not turned out to be a disaster that the anti-tariff crowd has projected, nor has it been a cure-all. And the pro-tariff crowd can't claim that it has been a fantastic thing. So it's more long-term and more nuanced than any of that. This has been episode 21 of the Extremely Non-Extreme podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll be back again with another episode in the near future.